take the presentation. Listen, from our perspectives, and we are scientists producing data, what we want you to take away is three things. And so just for the presentation, I'm going to tell you what these three things are from all of this data. Hopefully, I'm going to inspire you that you want to actually go and pick up the 200-page document, the latest one, and read it. But if you don't, here are the three things you want to take away. Thing number one, from all of this data that we have available, when you think climate change, the first thing, one of the things you want to think about, what the data is telling you is that, I'm using this phrase, the unprecedented is becoming inescapable. That's the first thing all of that data shows us. The unprecedented is becoming inescapable. So I'm going to pull from the State of the Caribbean report and the State of the Climate report just to make the point. What do I mean? The truth is, the data we are now seeing is telling us that we are entering into an unfamiliar, new, multi-hazard era, marked by the intrusion of the unprecedented. We are entering a new climate era. But you want to note how we define this climate era. It's a multi-hazard era marked by the intrusion of unprecedented. So when the hazards come, a number of them are unprecedented. Just to prove to you that the data shows this, one of those hazards, if I were to ask you, you would have told me, is a heat. It's just hotter, absolutely hotter. And you can pull up the report and see a diagram like this. And all you want to interpret from this diagram is that as you go from left to right, that red thing spreads out, because in the vertical is the year. And this is a diagram showing you the number of really, really, really hot days in a year. And the closer we get to the present, which is going to the right, you'll notice that the red bar is spreading out longer. And the truth is, we have seen the same global warming that the world has seen, greater than 1 degree in the last century, but we are seeing much more hot days in a year, and even worse, much more hot nights in a year. Because in the day we come to Garden House and we in the AC, but in the night we depend on our own fan and our own things. And so you get many more hot nights in a year. So one of those hazards now is heat. Heat, and the data supports this. But it's not the only hazard. We're now seeing great variability in rainfall. And how we see it is, of course, one year we get a whole heap of rain, and then the next year we get very limited rain. But we're also seeing the nature of how rain falls is changing. And we've done the science, it's in the report. Many, many dry days, and then when it rains. So the intensity, that's another new hazard in this new multi-hazard era. And we wish we could stop there with two, but we have now seen more extremes. By that, on the left, we're seeing more intense hurricanes. So not necessarily more hurricanes, but more hurricanes that become major hurricanes. And then on the right, we're seeing more multi-year region-wide droughts. So since 2009, we actually have had 2 multi-year droughts across the Caribbean, where the entire Caribbean has been impacted, 9-10, then 13-16, and that doesn't include the droughts where your own country alone. So droughts, extreme rainfall are among the new hazards in the multi-hazard. And the last one, of course, is higher sea levels. So sea levels in the long term have risen by about 1.7 millimeters per year. If you take from 1993, however, that doubles. And if you take Jamaica since 2004, that doubles to about 6 millimeters per year. The rate of sea level rise is increasing. And the diagram there is really just to show you can trace this in the lack of the beach. That one is for Negril. And if you can see the dotted green line, that is actually where the beach was in 1971 versus where it was later. And you can call multiple places that you can see this. Roselle, Little OJ, Treasure Beach, right? So the truth is, the data supports that we are in this new multi-hazard era, where any of these represent the hazards, and that when you have one of these, it's coming in with an unprecedented intensity. I was trying to think how I could get you to see that you knew this intuitively. And I thought, well, you know, last year, 2023 is a good example. And I'm going to use just what was reported in the paper. At the beginning of 2023, in March, our Prime Minister reported that we had to spend 100 million more for drought. It was drought at the beginning of 2023. But by the time we hit November and got potential tropical cyclone 22, so it was not a hurricane, it was just an intense rain event. You then had damage from heavy rains at over 100, you know, the road damage alone was 409 million, and then agriculture was 274 million. And the point I'm trying to make is you don't have to think hard to recognize that in 1 year, you're not getting either one or the other. You are getting multi-hazards, and it's costing us. But I'm going to push it a little further. I said that the takeaway is that the unprecedented is becoming inescapable. Why am I using the word inescapable? Because part of the science we do that is also reported on in those reports is the science for the future. It's not just doing how it has changed up to the present, but it's also know how it's going to continue to change to the end of the century. And when you begin to do that kind of science, some more things emerge. One, it's going to become even hotter. So we have seen a degree by the end of the century, if the world doesn't do anything, we're at 3 to 4 degrees. We have seen 23 more hot days, but by the end of the century, we will be at 98%, up to 98% of the days in a year being hot, where hot is defined by current standard, and 2% cool. All right? So the kind of unprecedented you are seeing now will become inescapable when it refers to heat. What about the rainfall? Again, same kind of pattern, and all you want to notice that as you move from present, go to the end, the brown gets more intense in brown and expands in the vertical. We're going towards a drier Jamaica and Caribbean region. So it's not that we're going to lose variability. Yes, we're still going to be wet 1 year and dry, but we're going to start to vary about a lower mean. And so we know already from the science and the documents that I'm encouraging you to read that we're going to be 20 to 40% drier as we move towards the end of the century. We know, yes, we know we're going to have higher sea levels. We have seen millimeters of sea level rise, but the projection is that by the end of the century, under the worst scenario, we could have 1 meter of sea level rise. And what 1 meter will do to inundation is also there. And then, of course, we know we're going to see more intense extremes. This one is really just to try to say, the table is saying by the time you hit the 2030s, 17% of the time will either be in moderate, extreme, or severe drought. By the time you hit the 2060s, 26% of the time. By the time you hit the 2090s, 34% of the time. And so the point is, we're still going to have this multi-hazard extreme, but now the unprecedented aspects are going to become entrenched. And this then makes the unprecedented become inescapable. So my argument is, when you get the reports, one of the first things you want to take away is that the unprecedented is really going to become inescapable. That's what you must use the data to speak to you about. Just before I leave that point, I said it was 3 things. It's very important that we get that picture, that the unprecedented is becoming inescapable. And in truth, we see it already in our region. If I were just to use hurricanes alone, we can see that the unprecedented is becoming inescapable. Because in 2017, we said, boy, it was an unprecedented season because we saw 3 Category 5 pass through the Caribbean almost at the same time, Irma, Maria, Jose. Then we said 2019 was unprecedented because we had Dorian, and Dorian was a superstorm that sat over the Bahamas. And I don't know how many of you were reading the comments of the Prime Minister of the Bahamas this week at the UN Assembly, where he says Dorian cost them about $9 billion when their whole annual earnings were 3 billion, you know, and we thought that was unprecedented. But then we had 2020 when we exhausted the alphabet and we had to name the storms alpha, beta, and we thought that was unprecedented. And then I don't have to ask you about the last one, because then we have 2024 when we had Beryl, and having a Cat 5 in June, the end of June, that is unprecedented. And so you get the idea when I talk about what you must read from the data, which is in all of those wonderful reports, is that we are in an era where the unprecedented is becoming inescapable, and that's what we must take away. Why is this at all important? Because unprecedented climates equal unprecedented impacts. And we know this if we use, for example, the IMF's 2021, I think it was, report, where they reported on the Caribbean versus other small islands versus other states. They said, listen, in the Caribbean, disaster frequency is 7 times more than other states. And the impact on GDP, the damage, is 6 times more than on other states. That's the unprecedented becoming inescapable. And one last thing, though, again, you knew this intuitively, because every year the PIOJ produces a damage report and the impact on the economy. And what you begin to see is not just the magnitude of the event, but it's the frequency of the event. And so you see that in 1999 we had drought and it cost us 0.2% according to the PIOJ. And then in 2001 it was Michelle costing us 0.7%. And in 2002 it was the May-June flood rains costing us 0.6%. And we got away in 2003, so Charlie and Ivan made up for it in 2004. Ivan costing us 7%. And then in 5, Dennis, Emily, Wilma, 7, Dean, 8, Gustav, plus drought, 10, Nicole, and we run the list down to Beryl. We knew intuitively that the unprecedented is becoming, and it's not just the intensity, but the frequency. We are always having to spend on recovery, taking a portion of our income to spend on recovery from a climatic event, whether drought or things. So that's the first thing I want to say. We have a lot of information. It exists. I've shown you the reports, and I'm hoping I'm really exciting you to read the reports. No. I want you to go in and delve into the details. I'm just merely trying to point out this exists. This information exists. This is not hidden away. This is commissioned by the PIOJ and is on their report. But the takeaway when you read it mustn't just be to say, boy, it's 2 degrees hotter. It must be that the unprecedented is becoming inescapable. And what you must read into that is that Jamaica's development trajectories are continuously being disrupted. Every year we are dealing with 1 or 2, and we have to deal with money to recover from climate. All right, very quickly, I said 3 takeaways. What's the second takeaway? So the first one, when you read all of those reports, is that the unprecedented is becoming inescapable, which tells us that the trajectories are continuously disrupted. Don't mind how I'm going to phrase this, but the second takeaway is that the untouched are becoming imperiled. The untouched are becoming imperiled. And I'm going to explain what I mean. Very often when you ask, how is climate change impacting Jamaica, what you reach for is the agricultural sector. Because it seems so obvious, And in fact, again, the PIOJ has produced this wonderful diagram about the agricultural productivity index and shows that for Jamaica, every time agriculture wants to perform, either flood or drought tends to bring it down. Now, when you have a year like last year, which was drought, then flood, you really can't. So there are some things that we naturally think of are impacted by climate. In the new kind of era that I have just argued existed, this new era of the multi-hazard with the unprecedented, the thing we need to watch out for now are the other sectors which are now beginning to show direct climate impact. For that, I'm going to beg you to get excited to read another whole set of reports, because the Ministry of Economic Growth and Job Creation asked us as a university to do vulnerability assessment reports for 5 priority sectors, and we delivered this in 2021 for the tourism sector, the housing sector, the health sector, the water sector, and the coastal sector. And the question was, are these things impacted now or going to be impacted? So look beyond agriculture. So what we did, of course, we looked on, what if these sectors had a 100-year return period flood, or had 1 meter sea level rise, or suffered from a 2 degrees temperature rise, etc. And we applied that lens to each of these sectors. I just want to give some extracts from 4 of these reports. Let me start with the first report for tourism. This extract is just temperature, and it's the summary. It says, estimates indicate annual loss of tourism expenditures that range from 26 to 42% by mid-century, and reflects the direct result of an increasing unattractiveness of the destination as temperatures increase beyond the ideal range. So we expect tourism to be impacted by sea level rise because we're a beach. But this report is making the case, yes, there is that, but it's too hot. And it says the analysis found that temperatures are projected to have a larger impact on arrivals and expenditures than rainfall, because a 1% increase in mean temperatures results in a decrease in 13% in tourism arrivals. And so suddenly, things that you were not associating with climate are now becoming imperiled. And this is where we want you to think, that we have to begin to think beyond what we think climate is impacting. Let me pick up a report from the housing sector. And I remember each one looks at all kinds of variables. I'm just choosing a single result. For the housing sector, here is a result for the 100-year return period flood. And of course, unprecedented is becoming more. So exposure analysis revealed that 21 communities across the island are likely to be extensively affected by rainfall inundation, covering more than 41% of the geographical area of the community. These communities are primarily located in southern parishes and may also contain relatively high population densities, and they show what the communities are. So in the end, a total of 238 communities were considered moderately to critically exposed, and those communities accounted for a population of 931,338, or about 1 million, or over 270,000 households. The point I'm beginning to make is that climate change is not just an agricultural problem anymore. Here now, these are households, that's me and you, and communities which you represent. Very quickly, I'm just going to give you 2 more. Let me pick up the health sector report. For flooding, the report said the exposure assessment for a 100-year return period flood revealed that 57 health centers and 1 hospital would potentially be impacted by riverine flooding event. And these health centers range from type 0 to 5 across all parishes. I'll just rub to the last sentence there. The Falmouth Hospital in Trelawney is the only hospital that appeared on the list, and it was for 0 to 2 meters, where the most important health center exposed is the Creek Street Mobay Type 5 Health Center in St. James. So for flooding, you begin to see now, wait, our hospitals are under impact. What about storm surge? 4 health centers and 2 hospitals were exposed to a 100-year return period. The Type C hospitals are in St. Elizabeth and Trelawney. So you're not hit by one, you're going to, right? And then extreme wind. 24 hospitals and 91 health centers could potentially be directly impacted by an extreme events. And the facilities were all types of hospitals and health centers across the island. Again, you begin to see Climate change isn't just an agricultural impact. And then last one, I'll quote from the coastal sector. Remember, you have all of these reports, delivered to Ministry of Economic Growth and Job Creation. The coastal, it says the southwestern coasts of Westmoreland and St. Elizabeth had the most consistent exposure of reefs, mangroves, seagrass, and fisheries with respect to hurricane wave heights and sea surface temperatures. Now, it should wear in your mind, Westmoreland, St. Elizabeth, hurricane wave heights, Beryl, you're getting where I am going. But this now is not damage just to the infrastructure, the land infrastructure. This is now mangroves, reefs, seagrass. The northeast and southeastern coasts exhibited exposure of fisheries. And now it is livelihoods and the fisheries who are impacted. And we're pointing out that the difference is most important with respect to fisheries between north and south. And then it ends, of the 14 parishes, Westmoreland deserves keen attention due to its exposure to multiple hazards: sea surface temperature, hurricane wave height, storm surge, and also because of the diversity of coastal assets that exist there: reefs, seagrass, fisheries, landings, etc. The information is there. I'm really hoping I'm sending you to read these reports. The truth is, this is the point that I am trying to make. The point I'm really trying to make is this. We tend to think about climate change in terms of agriculture, maybe water. But in fact, what we're ending up with is expanded vulnerability now. So people who were not vulnerable before, assets that were not vulnerable before, or even in sectors where there were, the vulnerability is expanding. Just want to make one more point before I leave this one, which is 2023, the same year that I spoke about before, where we had drought at the beginning and potential tropical cyclone, taught us a lot. Because 2023 also had a third hazard that hit us. It turns out that 2023 summer in the Caribbean is the hottest summer we have seen on record. 23. For us, I don't know if you remember last summer, it was hottest globally. In fact, July was the hottest July ever. It has only been eclipsed by this year globally. But for us, heat was a third hazard. And so we weren't dealing with drought at the beginning, we were dealing with heat in the middle, and then tropical cyclone at the end. When the PIOJ costs out their things, they don't cost out the cost of heat. And so that's not captured. And so the only way I can capture it is, again, I want to say, how could I make you relate to this? Is to run 4 newspaper headlines in front of you. The top one is Jamaica sets new demand record for electricity usage amid heat. Can you begin to see now that the electricity sector is now being impacted? Why that's important? Well, that's an impact for me as a consumer and as well for small businesses that know, you understand, it's a greater energy demand. Deadly heat stress. And in that case, it was agriculture, but not crops, livestock. And livestock is often the overlooked part of the agricultural impact of climate. Heatflation, sweltering heat sparking produce shortages. And you begin to see the trickle-down effect into me and you. But the one for me that really struck, and I will always have this headline and use it, some of these classrooms are furnaces. And in truth, what I am trying to make is that it's not just expanding existing vulnerabilities, but we are creating new vulnerabilities. And none of these headlines do we have reports on for the vulnerability of these sectors. And that is something we really need to pay attention to. The education sector is really taking a beating from climate and especially from heat. It's an unfair ask to ask kids to perform in in the kind of classrooms that they have. Especially, and you know how our classrooms are built. They are built really to protect from theft. And so you have concrete with what they call the little breeder blocks and the zinc roofs, and then fully concrete outside. That's an unfair ask, you know, to ask. And we have not paid attention, I have to say, as a country, to the impact. And the last slide I'll make on this idea of the untouched becoming imperiled is we've been trying to keep a track on, we are just a few, as you can see, but the research has to be done. But there are a whole new list of what I call new climate vulnerables emerging in Jamaica. I use Monroe mangled because heritage sites. Part of the challenge of Beryl and Monroe wasn't just that the school was shut down, but if you look on the buildings that were mangled, it was some of the older, the heritage things. And we're not beginning to think through how we are losing cultural heritage, and we're not costing that out either. Biodiversity. That little map of Jamaica is research we have done that says where becomes good for planting the little ordinary crops if we just use climate, not soil type, just climate. And you notice the green areas which represent where become good are in the interior, but the brown areas that say where is no longer favorable are on the coast. So we're getting a whole new set of climate vulnerable. The interior is where our richest biodiversity lies. And if that will become the place that's most vulnerable. Children, health, outdoor workers are critical. And so the need for occupational safety and health policies are important. And then, of course, something like insurance rates. This year, the insurance industry, one of the complaints that they have made is that the reinsurers have increased their rate because they have recognized us as a multi-hazard region. And the only thing they can do is pass that on to us. And so that now makes small businesses, homeowners, culture, factory workers, elderly among the new climate variable. All right, I leave the point. So I'm saying those documents that give us all of this climate data, when you're reading them, this is what you must take away. The unprecedented is becoming inescapable, and so development trajectories are continuously being disrupted. But the untouched, things we don't associate with climate, is becoming imperiled. And why that's important is because the development benefits, the people you expect to benefit the most from a development, continuous development, those benefits are continuously being eroded by climate. Climate is acting anti to the efforts to make the most vulnerable benefit. One last one. So again, when you read all of these, documents that exist for Jamaica, I want you to take away in your reading the unprecedented becoming inescapable. That's the temperatures and the rainfall and what it means. Really want you to take away that we enter in a new era where the untouched are becoming imperiled, especially the non-economic assets. But the last thing that I think I want you to take away when you read those documents is that the urgent is becoming immediate. So I could use the IPCC, who makes a clear statement: urgent climate action is the only thing that can secure a livable future for all. Or I can use the Prime Minister's statements earlier this year that Hurricane Beryl was a call to action. And this is the point. But what I'm going to use is instead use one more set of studies that we did. So we were asked to look on, I'm sure you have all heard the phrase 1.5 to stay alive. We were asked to look on, well, what would happen if the if the globe reached 1.5 degrees? Now remember, I've told you we have warmed one already, over 1.1 already, and we have done that in Jamaica. So what happens if we reach 1.5 degrees, all right, which is just 0.4 degrees more? And we commissioned a whole series of studies. We led them for the region, and we saw things like 40% less hydropower in Suriname, diminished agricultural productivity in Jamaica, regional cost of damages will go 2 to 3 times higher, or will be 4%, increase in aridity across the region, or the coastal infrastructure, seaports and airports would be inundated. And the point I'm trying to make here is 1.5 is likely to be exceeded before 2035. So this whole goal of limiting 1.5 to the end of this, if we don't do anything, it's likely to be exceeded. That's the projection on the path that we are on now. And what you see is that the kind of impacts, related losses and damage, really escalate for every degree of warming, or every point degree of warming. But more than that is that climate isn't the only thing acting. And so when you take these climatic impacts, which are significant, and you think about them interacting with other compound impacts, so things like, a pandemic, which suddenly changes your demand in hospitals, and then climate adds upon that, the demand for water that hospitals use, and then climate adds upon that a drought, you begin to see the compounding risks, or you take, a change in a war, the war and the supply chain. The point I'm trying to make here is that we don't have the luxury anymore of sitting and waiting to figure out what we need to do, because climate is going really fast in the severity of its impacts, and those impacts are going to be compounded when you think of the non-climatic impacts as well. So I'm finishing. What I'm really trying to say, another way to say it, is that our sustainable development goals are in danger. There's every single one of them that's impacted for Jamaica. And again, you may want to have listened to the echoes of the news over the last week, and all the Caribbean leaders talking about us, not achieving the Sustainable Development Goals by 2030. But those are for us bound up in Vision 2030. So we're in danger of not achieving because climate is doing that. This then means that a couple of things become urgent for us. One, we have some development options that we have to really begin to think through. And they're no longer a choice. They're no longer when we have the ability to do so. We have to deal with them now. The first is, of course, adaptation. We know we're in this new era. And we know it's going to be marked by the unprecedented. That's inescapable. Even if we were to cut out every greenhouse gas emission now, we have committed to climate change. And so we have to adapt. And I hope I have made the case that it's every sector that needs to adapt. Rapid and far-reaching transitions across all sectors and systems are important for a livable and sustainable future. I say that to say, you remember those 5 reports that I told you we did that did the vulnerability analysis of those 5 sectors? We then followed them up with adaptation plans for each of those sectors. Those reports have been handed over in 2022. Those adaptation plans talk about the state at the time, what are the gaps, what needs to be implemented, what would be the pathway to implement them. And I'm not saying that they are perfect, but we have the starting point. We know what we need to begin to do. And those reports were handed over. So we had the vulnerability, we have given the adaptation. Clearly, they are, for the new emerging climate vulnerable groupings, we need similar reports. So we need that for the education sector, we need it for culture, we need it for sports, and you can keep going on. So one option that can no longer be an option is we really need adaptation planning now and to begin the process of implementing. The second one is clearly mitigation. And for us in the climate world, mitigation is what do we need to do? If you look at that diagram, the black is how much the greenhouse gases have been going up. What do we need to do to bring them back down so that we reach 1.5 or 2 degrees. And in truth, we know that all we are really trying to do is create a better livable future, because we're committed to climate change, but can we do 2 degrees instead of 3 or 1.5 instead of 2? That's mitigation. For us in the small islands, mitigation comes to really 5 things. Energy, dealing with the energy sector. Oceans, protecting the blue economy. Land use, preserving green spaces. Transportation, very critical, and that's land, sea, and air, and waste. Those are the 5 sectors where mitigation is possible for us. Next year, at the next conference of the parties, where everybody gathers for climate, Jamaica is putting forward its new national determined contributions. They are in the process now of determining how much greenhouse gas will Jamaica put out. The first time we put this forward, it was premised on energy alone. We really need to make sure that the new heightened ambition, because Jamaica is a leader, we were one of the first to put forward an NDC plan. The new heightened one must take into account all of these. And you know, I really want to say, we're doing it to decrease the greenhouse gases, but in truth, we need to do this anyway. So all mitigation for us is really also adaptation. You know, we really need to deal with these things. And we can talk through what we could do to mitigate in any of these sectors, but these are the 5. And we must make sure that that report that commits us to a greenhouse gas future, which we have to submit for next year with the rest of the world, captures these sectors and our efforts that we are doing. I'll finish them off. I couldn't be here without asking for a research agenda. We are from the Climate Studies Group and the Institute for Sustainable Development. The Climate Studies Group really was started by Professor Chen. And we have existed because we have a passion. and we have produced all of these reports. But I'm going to make a statement to say, but there's really no deliberate funding of a research agenda for climate. And that's not just funding us, but if climate represents such a significant thing for us, and I hope I have made that case clearly, we need a research agenda. What should it do? I've listed them. Clearly, we need to prioritize data collection so that our action is based on data. All right? We have data in the temperatures and rainfall, but climate is way beyond that. We need now the supporting health data, the supporting socioeconomic data, the supporting et cetera, et cetera. So we have to prioritize that and be really systematic about what we need to collect in order to make the cases we need to make. We have to prioritize innovation and new technology and an entrepreneurial ecosystem. And you're going to ask me why. Because climate impacts every country differently. And our answer cannot be to import a solution. We need contextual innovation. But the only way we can get contextual innovation is the prioritization of an innovative ecosystem. Clearly, early warning, risk monitoring. There are new developments in climate. There is a whole new climate finance field, loss and damage. We need to do the data to support our claims for loss and damage, so we stop using other money to deal with loss and damage. We need new models for climate finance, etc. We clearly have to prioritize a research agenda. And then the last 2, a structured education agenda. We do need that, and that's education throughout the formal and non-formal system. And then lastly, what I'm calling a deliberately collaborative agenda. I will say that there's a lot of climate action going in individual sectors and probably funded by project managers. But we now need the mechanism to bring them together, to leverage the benefits, to make sure that we're mainstreaming. So having said all of that, that is the pathway to resilience. But the window is rapidly closing. And a climate resilient development strategy integrates mitigation, adaptation, education, research, and collaboration. And because, it's how do we bring all of that together and integrate it into the normal operation of society? So, I end where I started. There's a whole lot of climate data relevant for Jamaica. And I think I've walked you through IPCC, 5 vulnerability reports, adaptation, state of the climate, Jamaica, state of the Caribbean climate, and that's just a sampling of what has been produced. We do not have a reason to say we don't have data to start. But what I'm arguing, the data can overwhelm. I hope I've excited you to read the reports. I say that one last time. But if it's overwhelming you, take away these 3 things. The data is saying, 1, the unprecedented is becoming inescapable, which means that our development trajectories are continuously disrupted. The untouched are becoming imperiled, which means that we're beginning to deny, erode development benefits in various sectors. And 3, the urgent is becoming immediate, which means that development options now need to be holistically integrated. And if you forget all of those 3, one other thing you must take away is that clearly climate is a development issue. It's not just a little weather phenomenon. And thank you for listening.
Well, Prof. Taylor, I think you left members stunted, a bit scared. I think this for us is an eye-opener as legislators, because what it brings forward to me is how it is that we look at the budget, the annual budget, and how it is that we integrate the climate change issues that we have in how it is that we spend on school construction, how it is that we spend on our drainage, our road networks, and housing construction and everything, and shows how integrated they are, that we can be just spending, but then in the short term spending more to bring it back to a respectable, and we see it, I mean, currently. How it is that we deal with the energy, how it is that we deal with our hospitals, where we build them. I mean, that brings to mind even the reconstruction or rehabilitation of the aerodrome in Negril, which now has to be relocated because of the flooding that takes place there. So it has brought to all of us, I mean, just the issue and how important this is, and I think each and every one of us has an interest on where we are just as a country, despite which party that we support, but where we are now in protecting ourselves and preparing for the inevitable, as you put it. So I open the floors to questions. Go ahead, member.
Good morning. Professor Taylor, I think you have scared us straight. And I think it is quite necessary, because I don't think we're having the discussions that I believe we should as a country, because our population is not recognizing the impact of climate change. I think we're focused on too many other things. We're distracted. So you are right when you said intuitively we're aware that these things are happening, but for some reason we're not paying attention. And so that is why we're here today. This was one of those discussions that I specifically asked for, because I think climate change is just not getting the attention it should. Now, you mentioned quite a few things. 82% of the population living along the coast, and where I am from is below sea level, Falmouth. And you also mentioned, right, the hazard, our hospital being impacted But that was one of the questions I had we're a country that is very small within the overall climate change discussion. But what are some of those adaptation measures that can be implemented along the coastal communities, such as Falmouth, to protect against rising sea levels and storm surges? That's one. I have a number of questions. I don't want to bombard you, but where I am from, it is severely under threat.
Thank you. The question you raise is extremely important. In terms of looking at coastal defense, we need a combination of, in some cases, engineering. So many of you will recall that several years ago, probably over a decade, there was a proposal to put a barrier in the Negril under the water and several hundred meters offshore. Because of local dissatisfaction with that proposal, it was never done. Unfortunately, nothing was put in its place. We also know that if we maintain and manage things like mangroves, seagrass beds, and the natural coastal environment, that has a tendency to reduce the impacts of things like climate change and storms and so on. It doesn't solve the problem, but it definitely makes things easier to deal with. So for places like Lucy, for Falmouth and other places where you're talking about important coastal areas which are sometimes below sea level, you're going to have to look at a variety of solutions. Some will be natural and some will be engineering. One of the other things we need to look at as well in a sort of more broad light is if we continue to build in wetlands and continue to remove mangroves in order to build housing or hotels and so on, that makes us even more vulnerable to the inevitable sea level rise. Sea level rise ain't going away. So we should be thinking about, well, let's build further back if we can, and maybe changing that model of every hotel has to be right there on the beach, because that's not sustainable.
Can I continue, Chair? I also am interested in some of the specific impacts of climate change on the mangrove ecosystem, because I also have some of that in my area. And you mentioned people building, and it is almost as though we can't prevent them, or we are not doing what we must to prevent persons from just building anywhere they feel like. What are some of those impacts?
The sea level rise is one of the problems. We also see increased acidification of the oceans. They are absorbing more carbon dioxide because we put carbon dioxide in the atmosphere. As it absorbs the carbon dioxide, just like literally like a soda or a soft drink, it becomes acidic for the same reason. It's got carbon dioxide in it. That creates a problem because shellfish, corals, and others have a problem creating their skeletons and living in more acidic water. It also creates a problem for larval fish, bony fish, as they're growing up. They don't do nearly as well in acidic water. So it affects shellfish, and it affects any fish that aren't shellfish. So that is a problem, but again, it's not a problem we can do a lot about, because we as Jamaica or any of the small states in the Caribbean are going to have problems fixing the ocean pH, but we can at least take care of the coral we have. We can put in place schemes to replant, well, not replant, but to increase the amount of coral by planting in other places. We really do have to take care of the mangroves. Yes, we are cutting them down, but we are stressing them in other ways as well. And it is a highly valuable ecosystem. Just one last point to tie this to economics. Jamaica, like most of the small island states in the Caribbean, compose the most highly, let's say, most highly tourism-dependent economies on the planet. Jamaica, I think, is 14 in the world list. Aruba is number 1. Our tourism is almost entirely dependent on a healthy coastal environment, which means healthy coral reefs, healthy seagrass beds, healthy mangroves, and that's how you get the white sand beaches, because the white sand comes from coral. If we continue to manage tourism resources, that is the natural resources, without taking into account that we are the ones who determine whether they survive or not, then we are likely to push our tourism further down and lead it to a place where it will become quite precarious, which is not good if we have an economy that is almost totally dependent on it. And so that's something we need to start looking at. One of the things that Prof. Taylor didn't mention, there's a paper which he produced, I think, along with a bunch of other people from all over the world, was it 2019 or 2015, on the coral reef tipping point, which talks about as we warm up the planet, when we hit 1.5 degrees, when we hit 2 degrees, within 10 years or so of us hitting that temperature thing, we're likely to lose a very large proportion of coral reefs worldwide. If we hit 1.5 degrees, we're looking at about 70% of corals just sort of giving up the ghost. And if we hit 2 degrees, we're looking at 99% of corals. So it's prudent, yes, we need to really start managing those natural resources as if our lives and economy depended on it, because it does. But we also need to start broadening our economy and trying to figure out, well, what else do we do in addition to tourism so that we're not as vulnerable? Sure. Which is why putting air conditions in all the schoolrooms around the country is vital. Research shows very clearly that children learn less well the warmer it is. It's not just that they're uncomfortable and irritable. They don't learn. So what we are looking at is a situation where, as our schoolrooms become warmer and warmer, our ability as a country to develop the human capital we need to run our economy gets worse and worse and worse. So putting air conditioners in school classrooms is not a matter of comfort and luxury. It is what we absolutely need to build the human capital we need to get to where we would like to go. If we don't do it, our economy will not grow because we have no capital to drive it.
I'm very happy that that was stated. Chair, I have 2 more questions, but okay.
Can I just add something very quickly? One, I want to say, one of those vulnerability reports is on the coastal sector. It does look on the mangroves, and it goes around the island and looks. So there's quite a lot of information there, plus the adaptation approaches that are there. But I want to add something. And I'll pick up from where Dr. Smith left off a while ago. Yes, it's important to put the ACs in the classroom, but don't divorce that from now what your commitment is under the energy sector policy.
Right.
You can't certainly put them in there and then run them off of fossil fuels, because then you have a challenge. You know, you've made 2 commitments. You have an NDC where you are committing, but at the same time, so this is what I talk about now, climate proofing, all of the actions and the collaboration across. It is clear we do need to figure out cooling, you know, but we have to do it in a way that is consistent now with the other commitments that we have made, energy and the NDCs, et cetera, and that's critical. The other part of that is, you want to make sure that the new infrastructure that you are putting in, I mean, I just follow the news. I know that there are some brand new schools that are going in, STEM schools, you know. Have those plans been climate proofed? Are they being built in a way, first of all, to take care of the, I don't know, if they are, you correct me.
But Professor, you're indeed asking the right questions.
And stop me.
Because I know that we're building new classrooms as well. I mean, my constituency is the beneficiary of one of those, but they're still building them just as how they were building them 50 years ago. And it's a question I've been asking too.
And right now, you are redoing classrooms that were destroyed by
Yes,
burial.
yes, but
Are
we're
we
just putting
simply
them in the
doing
same-
them
yes, yes,
to the
yes,
same?
yes.
And so what we're really trying to get across is, you know, you don't need to get a big pot of climate money to actually move the resilience agenda. You are doing things now. How do you ensure that they are climate proofed? Where do they have to go through? You understand the point that I'm making? And that's a simple enough step to take towards the resilience.
Our population does not like change. We don't like change. I have 2 more questions, and then I'll allow everybody else. I know, but this is a very sexy topic for me. The other area I've been observing is our our water resources. So we are having challenges, and I want to know whether or not, because you spoke about precipitation, whether or not that is impacting our water tables any at all. So that is something I would love to hear more about as well, and then I'll just ask the other question so I can close my mic off. Have we assessed the effects of climate change on our cultural heritage sites? Specifically, I think about Port Royal, and I think about one area in my constituency that I also have, the bioluminescence. So, you know, it is one of 4 places in the world that has luminescence 365 days a year, but we are seeing that it is being impacted significantly. I don't know if there has been any assessment in those areas as yet. No?
I'll start with the last one. No. And that now speaks to my point about having this research agenda that is not left to by chance. You know, there are some clear areas. Cultural, we have not done a thing to really research the impact of climate change on cultural assets. I would argue much the same for sports as well. Sports is such a climate dependent. The fields, the watering, the time of day in which you do sports, the infrastructure, we haven't done that either. You know, so there are a number of areas but the biodiversity is certainly one of them that we haven't really, but it really speaks to my larger thing. One of the things I would really love, and I think I'm trying to get at it, we can continue on a path of when we get funding, we do this study, when we get funding, we do that. Or we can go along a different path where we put in place things, infrastructure or processes or institutions that we can tap into to do this. So deal with your higher education institutions and research capacity so that now you have a very specific question. You only need to come, you know. But in that case, you're not going to have to deal with the research financing, you know. One of my pet peeves in another hat that I wear, which is the Dean for the Faculty of Science and Technology, is there is no competitive national science fund. So when you as a parliamentarian identify an issue that needs research, really what you should do is put it as the theme for the National Research Fund and say, we need a solution in water. And any researcher in anything, but there is nothing, so research is done, you know, haphazardly and not deliberately, you know. Deal with that as an issue, you know, so that it begins to answer other issues. You know, that's for me the approach you want to take, to deal with a mechanism to mainstream all projects so that they have a climate lens. Deal with a data mechanism, because the only way you can make some kind of statements is if you have data, but we're not collecting some of the data, especially on the time frames, etc. Deal with a strengthened climate change division. So you almost begin to say, what are those pillars that really can have transformational impact? Deal with a deliberate system for innovation and entrepreneurship. When somebody has a good idea, where do they go? You have a good idea to deal with cooling by non-fossil fuel. Where do you go with that idea? But if we deal with that, those are the kind of critical things that I think, you know, you must deal with, and then anybody can tap into them, and they can have real transformational, not against, you know, getting us a pot of money to deal with that, because we have to deal with that. Climate financing is out there, and we must create mechanisms to get to those as well, you know. And we need to begin to think climate financing in ways that we have not yet begun to think about. Transport, for example, deals with a lot of emissions. Has a transport sector thought that they need to go after green funds out there because to build the road, the highway, because the highway is going to allow for faster movement and less emissions? Or has the bus system thought that they really, you know, the better bus system is the less cars you have? Those are all eligible for climate finance, but we never think about climate in those ways, and that's part of what I'm trying, you know. But to answer your very first point about water, I am so sorry. We went up. Yes, there is a direct correlation between water and availability, with rainfall and availability of water. And again, we have a whole report, which I see I've excited you enough to make you go and download those vulnerability reports, which talk about that, and therefore talk about how things we need to deal with. I mean, we get most of our rain consistently on the north, but our major population centers are on the south. So whether it is the pipeline that's going to bring it from north to south, and especially now that we have a north-south highway, it can run along it, whether that's the solution, whether it is rainwater harvesting and ensuring that every new development has something to catch, whether it's community pond, you understand where I'm going, right? And then also the WRA has also produced a recent report looking on climate and Water Resources Authority. Data and information is out there.
All right, Member Sibley's, then Member Jackson, and then Member Clark. No, even though you helped me out, I mean, that was the order before you came here. All right, Member Sibley's.
Thank you, Chair. I want to thank Professor Taylor and his team. While I was online, I joined the meeting online, and I heard your opening remarks of that you thought you did something and wondering what you did so wrong. And Professor, I guess that is a perception out there that this committee may just meet because of what persons have done wrong. But in truth and in fact, its focus is on the budget and how different things might impact the budget. So here we are. And I want to thank Member Hamilton for making the recommendation, because it's an important topic. Now, I also was very pleased that punctuated throughout your presentation was the fact that the Ministry of Economic Growth and Job Creation keep commissioning your team to do research. It means that there's a bridge, there's not a silo, government over here, researchers over there. It means that the government is interested in how climate change is affecting Jamaica and the role that the government can play. But the other silos that I realize that is not tapped into, which we all play a role in that silo, and that is of the citizenry. We are still over here, and the government and the researchers are over there, and they are talking up a storm, and sometimes, just like and I don't want pastor to put me out of the church. But just like in Christianity, where I love and go to, you tend to say that we need to give our life to the Lord, refrain from sin, because X will happen. But it doesn't mean that it is connecting or it is finding those persons who ought to come, because it's usually the choir and those who are members of the church that attend church. So how do we move this continual process that have started, where two silos are now joined, to include the important silo that is out there, that is the citizens that are maybe upset about the laws that legislators would have made to ban plastic. Or is it that we get us, the citizen, to partner and to start to work towards the goal? And what role does the university play? Because I know there's a role for government and other stakeholders, but what role does the university play in getting this information out? That's my first question.
Them looking towards me to answer. Boy, boy, one of the first things I have to say is, we're climate scientists, and very often the challenge is that we throw to the scientists that they must do everything. They must generate the information, they must produce the report, they must translate it into a language that it can reach the people, and then they must go out there and get the people, to understand the information.
That's why I said the university, because I'm not talking about the scientists and the university.
It's a higher education institution. But to answer your question, I think you're asking, how do we really mobilize the citizenry, all right? Yes. I think I want to go back to where I ended, the collaborative, and putting in place the structures for that kind of collaboration. I think citizens will be really moved. Well, so clearly we must produce this information, yes? We must then make champions out of you, because you directly interface with the citizenry, yes, right? And then you will call us clearly and will help define the projects, etc. But where we can show that it directly impacts the citizenry. But then there are several other ways. You interface with the church, with the communities groups, etc. All of these, and the ability to have this information embedded in those, in either education fora or projects. I want to argue that you hold a big key there. So if I can convince you, then we can exploit the partnerships and the collaborations out there. But the university hasn't been sitting down and waiting for that. We have several projects I was looking to. One of them, for example, we just completed with the School of Education a climate change primer for primer. So a book for primary and secondary schools, with the teacher aspect and the school aspect, one of the first in the Caribbean that speak to climate change from our perspective, and we have introduced it and given it to the schools. The Ministry of Education was well aware of it, things like that. So we're not just sitting down. Lots of projects, smaller projects. We worked with a number of communities on farming, and approaches to dealing with smart agricultural farming. We're working with the health, with a number of small communities on health. So we're not just sitting down and waiting, but I think the bridge is, you represent a significant bridge to the citizenry, and we will happily collaborate. Once we have now made you into the climate change champion.
So to follow up on that and to segue into something else, which I'm glad you made mention of the fact that we as legislature, as the people's representatives, need to do something. And you will, I take it that you, the researcher, you, the educators, will equip us, because you can imagine we are not properly equipped. And you might even come back and say, but we have produced these reports and we have done this, but we need it to be broken down in such a way that in tools that we can package, in tools that we can really package, and that we be invited to the table. Today, we have invited you. We are asked, I mean, as legislature, I'm not talking the executive now. I'm talking the legislature, the 63 of us, right? Invite us to a forum. Give us the tool. Let us work out a strategy. When is it I can invite you to my constituency? You know, which constituency should go first in terms of where would climate change impact more? So I welcome that, and I look forward to this sort of interaction, because I would like to invite you to my farming community in Bagol and those places in the hills, because we do vegetables and we are getting a lot of rainfall, and it's destroying the farms, and landslides are ever so often now. So we want to hear, we want to see how it connects. The people want to see how climate change connects. Not for us to be talking about landslide, but to talk about the economical impact on their livelihood. And how is it? The segue question is, how is it that we balance economical growth with preventing the effect of climate change? How is it that because we need to send our children to school. We need to send them to the University of the West Indies so that they can become scientists, and we need to send them to, of course, I must call the University of Technology, right? And NCU and NCC, right? How is it that you are going to tell me I must not do this? How am I going to send them to school? So that is the big question, and that is, I think that is the scary part, and the part that causes persons to not be interested in the conversation about climate change, because climate change is here. The persons who are talking about climate change is talking about it and not understanding the bread and butter issue. How is it that we bridge that? Thank you.
Thank you so much, members. So quickly to speak to that collaborative effort, because I think we're saying the same thing. And so Prof spoke to our engagement with curricular development, and it's happening at the primary level, across all the levels, in fact, and not just your typical university curricula. For example, we have the professional development courses that we're rolling out, that a number of them are informed by climate change and our response to climate change. For example, electric vehicles and how our countries are rolling them out and the implications for us and our emissions. So we're working there. And I think if we consider our engagement with media, it's another way we reach the populace. this, that what you're living, that lived experience of climate change, is helping persons relate to what I'm experiencing is climate change, and allowing persons to understand how they respond. And so we completely agree that going into communities, as we have done in the past, and going at your invitation are ways we can respond. I'm moving quickly to the tools because I know we're pressed for time as well, and we don't want to take up too much more of your time. We have developed tools that will make the information more palatable, easily understood to the average Jamaican. And so one of the things that we have done as a university, as a climate studies group, Mona, is develop different tools to share climate change information. So we have our latest, something called a climate information, education and tools platform that we are rolling out, that our water resources, our Met services have come to trainings about, where we can show persons if a storm like Beryl comes through on a different path, passes through Kingston, what's the rainfall, what's the wind speeds that we would experience, and therefore what are some impacts of flooding, for coastal flooding and that kind of thing. So we have those tools that deal with agriculture and the risk for agriculture. So just saying, as you speak about tools, we are into the development of tools, and we're open to development of new tools. And you speak about sustainable development. I don't think it's a one versus the other. There is no developing without considerations of climate change. And I think it's just our job to help our people understand that it's in our own interest to respond properly to climate change, to consider the water issues, to consider when we have new developments, we must consider how the water is going to be reaching the populace, and not ignoring that some places are already water stressed, and it's not just a climate change issue. So there are a number of things that we can partner on that as Jamaica we can have greater appreciation and we can better respond to.
During COVID, I was involved in something which was put on by the UN system in Trinidad and Tobago, and it was essentially a masterclass on development and climate. They basically put it on for all members of the House of Representatives and basically pulled us all together. We talked about things, they were able to get answers, and I believe that the UN is following up within Trinidad. So that sort of thing could be done as well here. I'm sure we'd all be very happy to work with the houses and make sure that everybody hears and can understand how this threat will affect them, their constituents, and the country at large.
One last answer, which, Elecia, sorry.
I just wanted to make a quick point, Prof. Whilst this is not legislature, we have provided training to Ministry of Local Government focal points and climate change focal points. So there's a mechanism within government. Each ministry is supposed to have a climate change focal point. Can't speak definitively about how well that's working, but that framework is in place, so maybe it's to strengthen some of those mechanisms. And just to say, we've supported training in those focal points.
Right, and my last point would be to you, member, that I think you're reaching exactly where I am trying to go. We need to stop doing this if I extend an invitation to you, or if you extend an invitation to me. I am saying, listen, we now have to, climate is making this huge impact on our development. We have to put in place the deliberate mechanisms so that whether you invite me or I invite you, I have to go into your constituency and deal with this. What are those mechanisms? And then when it's no longer climate, you can use the same mechanism to deal with health or whatever. You and I are on the same page. The only thing I'm asking for is let's stop treating climate as this on invitation, by chance, that kind of thing. What do we need to do to move beyond that? It's not impossible to put in place, for example, all constituency rollout education campaign starting with etc. That's a deliberate approach to doing it, you know, but we need to move towards that kind of approach to climate.
Well, just for your information also is that when we finish this meeting, we also do a report to the full house. And, you know, one of the recommendations that I'll be putting towards the committee is that I find it very much more effective than you sending a video in you being here and presenting the way that you did.
Yep.
Yeah? And we're going to make the recommendation, I mean, with the approval of the committee itself, that one is done to the whole parliament, to all 63 members. I think it will give us a different insight on how it is that we even fashion our own projects. Sorry? No. How it is that we even fashion our own projects for our CDF. And it also ties back into the recommendation that we will make, because as the member Sibley's rightfully said, we are not here to criticize, but also to see where there are gaps within the budget, gaps within in policy, in how it is that we can then recommend it to the government itself through our report to the full House, to see how we can change to catch up with where there are shortcomings. So that's a part of our responsibility also. So we're all saying the same thing and wanting the same thing as you do. Member Jackson.
Thank you, Chairman. Prof and your team, I muttered earlier on that you are not only being informational, but also scaring, you know. But it's a good kind of scaring, you know, that pulls us into action. I too want to extend my commendation to the work you are doing and sharing this information. Much of what initially I intimated to come into my colleagues have mentioned, and that by itself underscores the oneness around these issues. Just to make a couple of short comments in that regard. And I start at the end with Mrs. Myers' comment about the focal point with the local government authorities, because I believe that's a critical juncture to our area to focus on, to draw in what my colleague Sibley's mentioned about, you know, involving the people. Been around a little while, you have encountered a number of things, and what I was sharing with my colleague comes to my mind was Vision 2030. You know, I happen to have participated in that process. Now, Vision 2030 was a cross-administration development goal. Started in one administration, completed in the other, and there was no political pull with it. It's one, we agree on these things. Question asked, after, between then and now, 25 years later, how much of those goals we have achieved? And for me, I raise it because I think it provides a useful lesson in going forward with the work that you have been doing in climate change and its impact in the way that you have outlined it here this morning. And reflecting on that experience coming out of Vision 2030 is, one, having reached consensus, because I don't think even in here, there's no divergent view. We are on both parties, and you realize that we're at one place around this. Having reached the consensus, how do we now operationalize these things? Because the talk is cheap. If we acknowledge and we talk about it, but we don't implement it, then it's a waste of time to even have talked about it. I do believe, based on our experience, it has to be driven. Our people, old habits die hard. To tell people to do this differently because of these objectives and these dangers which are inherent in what is happening, it's a hard sell. You have to institute it. And I don't want to use the term draconian, right? But this is where the planning process comes in. And hence, I love the point made by Ms. Myers about the focal point. At the local level, all local authorities not going to go over much of what they talk about, for example, the schools and the public buildings, for example, right? Local authorities are the ones that have the final sign-off and structures right across the country. Mandate at the national level and then implement at the local level. So as of next year, 2025 or 2026, all buildings must adhere to this. 2, any remedial work on these buildings must adhere to these standards for all the reasons that you have set out this morning. So it has to be driven from the center rather than to allow it to spring up on multiple points at the base. And I support your point, Prof, in our role. Our role as political representatives, and we all have, those of us who have been around know from experience, we can be good catalysts to bring the community on board. You know, we go out here, we're going to vote at election times, and we develop relationship with voters. We can draw on those relationships that we have built in the electioneering period into the call it the adherence phase, adhering to those new building standards and codes and so forth that the local authority. So you see the nexus now between the authority, government, and the citizenry. But in that exchange, it allows for the kind of education and information is necessary to bring the people on board. Because all of these things that you're talking about is for our own well-being. And most importantly, you emphasize, Prof, development. You can't realize the development 10 years from now. And we have to look in the long term rather than, even the short, usual election cycles of 5 years, and look more medium to long term, 10, 15 years. That's when you're going to even see the full returns on some of these investments that you're making in implementing the change. So I like the idea of the tools that you mentioned about, that we can engage church groups and so forth. I'm going to think much about these and some of the churches in my constituency, because that's where community people converge most, outside of citizen associations and so where they are active. That has fallen down a lot over recent years. But that kind of participation to get the information. So if you have some videos, 45 minutes, don't make them too long. Okay? The concentration span is limited, and probably serialize them. Probably five 30 minutes presentation you can do over a period of time. So we mobilize at the base together with the local authorities. MPs can't do it without collaboration with the local authority, who are the instituting bodies. So I really want to just highlight that. And in the planning stage, the interconnectivity with entities like NWC, NIC, and those, you touched on many of the different areas that these entities like these are involved to. But those must have to be instituted at the central level, because that is far more efficient to achieve, to have those central authority on board. And every year, again, drawing upon the Vision 2030 model, that every budget cycle, a tick board is there, climate resilience or climate resilience compliance, something like that, to make sure that we are doing what we all agree must be done, but many times it don't get done because the old habits tend to set in. But to have those kind of tick-offs, and it can't go through, can't get approval until those compliance or those adherence are in place. But in closing, I must say, I said it was a good, scary presentation, which scares us into action. And as I said lastly, I have always been a critic, and I have to modify my thing about the seem in this juncture between the academic community and government, you know, in terms of the work, the technical work that you do, help to guide, assist and guide what we do in government. Because if they don't have that connectivity, then governance can be developed by drawing upon the research work that the academic community does on an ongoing basis. And the chairman will tell you, we get into quarrels in the past with your colleagues in the university because we don't feel that they're sufficiently supporting what we do in government. But then here in your presentation, I have to temper.
And this time around, it is if government is taking the research and making use of it.
Yes. But once again, thanks for the work that you do.
Thank you very much.
Oh, sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, just one other piece of research which we hadn't mentioned, which was completed in, I think, January of 2023. We worked with the Ministry of Finance and Statin to track the amount of climate-related expense in the Jamaican budget. What was interesting about that was that when we looked at what the government thought it was spending on climate, and when we actually went in depth to what was actually being spent on climate, we found about 10 times the amount of money being spent on climate-related expense than the government had thought it was already spending. The good news is that over the 3 years we looked at the budget years ending in 2019, 2020, and 2022, 2021, and 2020. The share of the budget that was spent on climate rose from 0.5% up to just over 1%. I'm assuming that it might continue since we haven't been looking at the budget since. But we were able to put together a system that could take the files which Statin produces from the budget and create a report which would tell you how much money was being spent on adaptation, how much would be spent on mitigation, how much would be spent on disaster risk management, and also where it was coming from. One thing that you should boast to people, and maybe it's a good boast, maybe it's not, the majority of money spent on climate-related expense in the Jamaican budget comes from the Consol Fund. Despite the fact that there are all these global funds and so on and so forth, we're still spending more on climate from our own pockets than from the international pockets. Now, maybe we should change that because they're causing the problem, not us. But there is that useful piece of information that can allow us to track how well we're doing, and if things increase, the information or the mechanism to be able to track that increase is there.
Smith, when you speak about the money spent on climate mitigation, could you illustrate?
All right, what we did was we went through all the budget submissions of all the ministries, departments, and so on, and we used a typology that had been developed by the Inter-American Development Bank. What they'd actually done was some work on trying to do this for all countries so that using the functions of government reporting system, all countries could then report on climate. So they developed this system and then decided to try it out in, I think, Jamaica, possibly the Dominican Republic, and one other country. So what we were doing was looking literally at the chart of accounts. We got a 20,000 long spreadsheet, which went down to the very bottom end of detailed sub-object, and we classified everything. So what did we classify it according to? Primary climate expense mitigation would be money that the government wants to spend on mitigating climate change. There was primary on adaptation, what we want to spend on adapting, like maybe seawall works and so on and so forth. And then what we wanted to spend on disaster. Then there's secondary, which secondary would be, we want to build a new school, but we're making it done in such a way that it also adapts to climate, but the primary purpose is building that new school. And so we went through all of those, classified them, did them year by year, and then was able to actually produce something which the government can use in the future, or we can work with the government to continue to do that if they wish.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman, and welcome members from the team. It is very hard, very, very hard to be the one that speaks after Member Jackson or Member Sibbles. But I'll just take up from where they have left off. And so, whilst we are here, we understand that the ice is melting in the north and it's creating a situation that is not positive for us here. And so we have to be mindful of it, and I'm very happy that listening to the team that you are somewhat on top of the situation. But I'm one of those persons who like to move away from the choir and go down to the level of the congregation. And the congregation which I speak of is John Public, those persons who listen to the news only but sees nothing else. The person who goes out to the fields in the morning or goes out in the little canoe in the days. So they're not there to sit in a meeting and to understand. We also have to break down the narrative so that they do understand where it is going. I suspect that all of us here understand very well the narrative that has been put in front of us. But what about Master and Miss Jane, who their level of education stop at grade 3 or grade 4 in primary school or all-age school? We now have to create that narrative. And I listened to Madam speaking about the tools. But in creating the tools, you have to create it in such a way that those persons understand clearly why is it that you're not supposed to throw the plastic bottle on the street. Who is going to pick it up? It's going to get into the river. It is going to get into the gully. It is going to end up in the sea. Climate change is real. I want to take us to Somerset Falls in Portland. What has happened? What caused all of that water to disappear? And if you go across the street from Somerset Falls, you realize that at least 25 or more, because I am privy to the fact that at least 25 or more feet of land has been lost to the sea, and it is still happening. How are we going to treat with that situation? What are we going to do to stop it from happening? Because the erosion is taking place more and more. Just as we used to build ad hocly before 1951 because of the shuttle situation that we had in place. But ever since the mighty earthquake of that year, we have started to build, and the construction provides for it and tells you in no uncertain way, you have to do it this way or you breach. We now have to start look at it where climate change is concerned, because we know not how long from now on that we will still be on Earth. And so we have to prepare ourselves for the long term, the long haul. What I realized over the years is that we have been more reactive than proactive. And it is high time that we get to the stage of being proactive. And being proactive is to say to the expat, because remember, all the hotels that are being built, and it is sad or whatever to say, that yes, tourism is what we depend heavily on. And so we pleasingly accommodate the situation. But in accommodating the situation, we also have to make sure that they sit anywhere outside in the international world, and we get the rain, and we suffer at the consequence of losing the mangrove that we speak so heavily about, the coral, and all of that helps us to survive as a tourism destination. So is it that we're going to willingly ask them to do just what they want? Or are we going to say to them, if you are going to remove mangrove, then you must now spend to put back in place the substitute that will allow us to live comfortable, just as if the mangroves were still in place. And so these are some of the things that we must pay attention to. And as a entity, an organization, you now have to say to the government of the day, This is what needs to be done, or else we are going to suffer the consequences as is in place. So we need, I remember as a youngster, growing up in the country with the grandmother, that there was a night that everybody said, we go out at the square because GIS is coming to show a movie. But in showing you that movie, they would have put in place at that time the polio situation information and polio or any other information that they thought that the rural or the citizens of Jamaica need to get. So before you finish watching the movie, you'd have gotten some information in the narrative that every single man in the rural areas could understand. And so we are saying to us today, don't feel as if that we're calling you here because we think say are we here so you do something wrong. No, it is to give you support, to have it highlighted, to publicize it. Say this is where we need to go. This is what we need to do. I agree with my colleague that we too have a role to play. Not very often. So can you imagine that agreeing with him today is something that is very important? But in essence, we have a role to play. You can't count it out. The people elected us for a reason, and so we need to represent them for that same reason. So in getting to the constituency, in getting to the residents, we have our role to play. So we can always drum up the support to have them meet with you, to ask you questions, to listen to you, and to understand all that you want to impart to them. And so, Mr. Chairman, you have done it before, but I would ask you to do it again, to summarize the situation, to encourage Professor and his team that all is not lost. We will make sure that we take it from a committee level to Parliament and to move it as seriously as it should, that I hear, because everything is in a domino effect, you know. We speak about climate change. It touches on the tourism that we badly needed. It touches on the fossil fuel situation, because we are also tied into a situation. How are we as a government with the large number of entities that depend heavily, or they are government run, and they depend heavily on energy? How are we going to move away from fossil to green? What you have done for me is that in short order, I may have to write to you or visit with you, because I also sit on the OACP, which the main tentacles are climate change, serious climate change in the Maldives, in the Eastern Pacific, the African states, and us in the Caribbean. Food security, because with climate change comes food security. And so I will be in a better position to lobby and to argue from the climate change position when I do sit in that chair.
In furtherance of his rare agreement with me, when you need us as a catalyst, don't wait for us to invite you. You can ask the chairman to invite you back.
Thank you, Chair. I have a question, but in my mind I'm thinking how best to coin it. And it has to do with one of our major roles as legislature, and that is the lawmaking part of our role, which is very important. In fact, some will say that is the role. But as we look at law and society, which is a course that is taught in many law schools, is it that society impacts the law, or the law impacts society. There are many arguments for and against. And in light of that fact, I want to look, can we engage society in a particular way where the law, the suggestion of changing the law comes from a percolator effect instead of top down, bottom up. It's everybody becomes a part of that conversation. And I figure more or less for that to happen, we would have to have the researchers playing a leading role in getting society to understand what is at risk and what we can do about it, and what are some of the change in legislation that can come about to do this. And then we can have a consensus in the room going forward. Because I can tell you, many legislatures will not come with a proposal to change the law that the people are not with. And so I'm asking, is this something that you have thought about in terms of some of the laws that need to be amended or new laws that need to come into being? And would you accept the proposal that I'm putting forward as to how to drive the change?
Okay, sure. Let me answer a couple of things. I agree with everything that you all have said. The one little point of divergence I have is I actually think if we go, we often tend to say that the ordinary man does not have an appreciation for climate change. And I think I disagree with that now. When I began climate change work 20 years ago, maybe I would have said yes. But climate makes its own case. And something like Beryl this year has made the case. And so I am actually very excited when not excited, but when I watch the news and I see the interview with the community, and they make the association. They may not be able to explain to you that it's greenhouse gases and so, but the ordinary man right now has such an awareness that something is wrong with the climate. And for me, what the challenge is how do we capitalize on that? The fact that right now, you know, if we do the CAP survey, the Knowledge, Attitudes, and Practices survey, it is going to be so high, which is a complete difference from when I started doing climate research. You just hear the man say, boy, the river come down and it mash up all my crops, and I've never seen rain like this or water like this before. Or, the truth is there is a great appreciation in the ordinary person that something is happening with climate. And the question is how we capitalize on that to make the education and how do we then move it to the next level, That's the first thing I would say. I completely agree as well that, boy, when you look on the member here said it, the 2030 goals, and I think I was trying to make that point. Climate is acting counter to the efforts for development towards those 2030. And so we have to figure out now the levels of action. I agree, one level has to be driven by government and the central government. But it's not the only level for action. You know, we then need to get down to the local government, then you need to get down to community, then you need to tap into the various arms of those kinds of community. And something we mustn't forget, we need to get the private sector on board as well. You know, there's a critical role, especially for the private sector, you know, in terms of not only adaptation, but incentivizing resilience. I happen to have spoken at the Institute for Insurance Association of Jamaica's conference 2 weeks ago. And I was trying to make the point, if there is an entity that can drive resilient action, it could be the insurance sector. Through innovation, the minute you decide you are going to give me a percentage reduction in my premium if I put on a hurricane strap, you bet that next year I will have a hurricane strap on. Right, because there's a clear benefit for you, you know. And so we need to begin to involve people like the private sector as well and show them that they have a role in driving resilience as well. They are impacted clearly, and they need to do what they need to do, but they can so incentivize the resilience efforts in Jamaica. And then I'll respond to your last thing. Law and the legal framework is one of those areas that we really have to take up. The truth is, and the law school recently, I think last year, the law school conference had a whole section on the gaps in environmental law, polluter pay principle, those kinds of things. You know, there are significant legislative gaps that we need to deal with. And it is not something that we are doing much in. But there is a whole legal framework. Very interesting. One of the very big developments globally with climate, I think I was saying it to the colleague here, is that this year, 2 international bodies have been asked to make rulings on climate. One was the Council on Human Rights, and the other one is the ICJ, the International Court of Justice. They opened it up for all countries to make submissions earlier this year based on what climate is doing for them. I will leave it for you to check Jamaica's submission, right? But right now, before the ICJ makes its final ruling, they are now asking for countries to scrutinize others' submissions so that they can, we can say, your submission, it opposes what I am doing, from that level. That is ongoing now. We need to make sure our voice is in this. And so, at one level, I would also ask for you to support the climate negotiation procedure and make sure that we have a strong negotiation team from the country as well. That's critical because we have our perspective which needs to be represented. But the whole legal framework, I agree, is one of the areas that needs to be addressed.
One of the things, what jumps out at me are the 3 main areas, and the urgent becoming immediate for me is the one that really shakes us to the core. Because in a sense I feel vindicated when we tie it back to mitigation. And something that I've constantly spoken of in the House, being the spokesperson for works and transport, is how do we mitigate before the disaster. And in your presentation, you showed the cost to GDP in what it costs us if we do not prepare ourselves properly. And the presentation that you did basically shows me, and I'm sure for all members, how there's an umbilical cord between climate change and what is happening, because it's not just now, and how it is that we budget. One, budget and how it is that we save. You speak about the schools, you speak about how it is that we look at how we are impacted now, that we prepare our drains, how it is that we deal with the public transport, even housing. And it brings me back to how it is that we see the construction sector evolving the way that it is. And are we actually putting in the proper laws and regulation to push towards the construction so that later down we don't come back here and speaking about the same things? And I think that is a big takeaway for us here in how it is that we can shift the mind of those in the power who craft the budget, that we take this issue of climate change something serious. Otherwise, the growth that we continue to say that we want to see, we won't, because we then continue to spend that resources, limited resources, in playing catch up after. And Dr. Smith, touched on a point that we also brought to this committee, the issue in Negril, with the groin. And I remember that case like it was yesterday, where the hotels, where it was recommended that the groin be installed. The hoteliers pleaded their case, and that groin never did happen. But what is the result of that? The coastline in the Negril is now being taken away from by erosion. And, remember Hamilton raised the issue of how it is that our ecosystem, how it is that we manage it while we are dealing with the economic side of it. And are we actually, while building out these hotels, are we putting in the regulations? Are we putting in the necessary capacity for us to have the growth within the industry? Because we do depend on it greatly. But are we then managing the environment at the same time? So while taking away from the environment, are we actually protecting what is left and adding to what it is that we already have? I mean, we see, for instance, how long it takes for the mangroves to grow. Palisados is an example. We see it there each time that we pass it. As long as I've been in this house, that project has been there, and we see that it's still at infancy stage as far as I'm concerned. Are we building out quickly enough to manage? Because it is here, and we are seeing it, we're living it every day, and that's why the urgent becomes immediate. For me, is a buzzword that we ought to get into the minds of every Jamaican, and I think starting with us as legislators, how it is that we can, and some of the weaknesses that we see, because I keep saying that we come here to a standing finance committee to argue the points that we see that are necessary, but then it is not taken on board because it's really just a talk shop than one that shapes the budget itself. So we are not done here. We were supposed to have the Ministry of Economic Growth and Job Creation. They were not able to come, so we're scheduling another meeting to bring them here, because to the point that Member Jackson make, we want to also see from what has been budgeted, where we are, where is it that we as a government, as a country, our goals that have been set, where are we in that list of goals that have been set? If not, then why are we not there? And is there more budgeting that needs to be done? The case that you have made, and I think we all agree in asking for more funding for research, because for me, while these reports have been asked for by PIOJ, what is it that is happening with these reports? Are we really integrating it in our developmental goals and protection of how it is that we do budget? Are we actually using them, or are we just saying that they are reports? Because there are many ministries that have reports that gather dust, and we actually do nothing with them. So hence why we want to have Ministry of Economic Growth here to find out what are they actually doing with these reports. Another case is really public education. You know, and enforcement, because there are laws on the books. Are we actually enforcing those laws to benefit the case that you have actually made, is what? Yep. Right, and how it is that we need to update some of those laws to the benefit of what it is that we want to achieve. You know, there's adaptation, mitigation, but in our case, from where I sit as a legislator, how is it that we prioritize in mitigating? We had a presentation here by National Works Agency a couple of years ago, and their own research has shown that we spend 70% more in their budget when we do not do proper mitigation. So we spend after the fact. And if we had spent it before, then we would have seen less expenditure later down. So it is critical, and there's a hasten, for debate and how it is that we deal with this matter of climate change. I really, really want to thank you, Professor Taylor and the team from UWI, in sort of tugging at our conscience, and because we do hear the issue of climate change. Sometimes you need a reality check to say. I like Member Clark. I remember I was a Parliament's representative on the ACP. I remember we were supposed to have a meeting in Vanuatu, in the Pacific, and it was flattened by a typhoon months before. We ended up in Fiji, but it gave me a better understanding of how small island states are impacted when we contribute probably the least to climate change. We keep on speaking of the climate fund, but are we actually doing what is necessary as a small island state in tapping into those, not only for budgetary support, but for them to pay their part in saving small island states like us is a conversation that we have to have as a parliament and as a country, and not just perform lip service in just the low-hanging fruits. Because if we're not careful, my grandchildren won't have a country that looks like what we have here now. Because in your presentation, in showing how the heat will impact our tourism, how the flooding will impact even our own natural resources as bauxite, and other areas of the economy, that 5 in 4 growth that we speak of will never become a reality. And that will be blamed on our generation in not taking it seriously. So, as I said before, a recommendation from the committee that we get the permission for you to come and present to the whole House in a different forum for us as legislators to understand where we are. And it is important for us to get the Ministry of Economic Growth, Ministry of Climate Change, which is something new, 2012, the first time we ever had a Ministry of Climate Change, but are we focusing really on the areas that ought to be and not just the areas that make good news and news clips, but the areas that are we really focusing on those and finding the finance for those areas that will really make the change, the transformational changes that are needed. So I want to say thank you for the presentation. The truth be told, this is the largest turnout we have had of the committee in quite a while. And I'm glad that it is climate change that has brought out the members. And it just shows you that every member, no matter which side of the aisle we sit, it is an important topic that we see as, so members, we had deferred the minutes of the meeting, the minutes of the last meeting, that was July 31st. I'm going to ask the committee that we defer them to the next meeting, right? Also that we, looking at the dates for the next meeting, looking at the calendar, members, for October and November, nearly every Tuesday and Wednesday has already been booked by a joint select committee or, all joint select committees. I am proposing that on the 15th is a Tuesday. There's a debate that's supposed to be started on that day in the House itself. That's the only morning session that is free. The 15th, Tuesday the 15th of October. Well, right, because it's not on the calendar, so the PAAC has precedence over that date. But I'm proposing that we bring the Ministry of Economic Growth and Job Creation to conclude this topic. We may extend an invitation to you to join us, since we're going to have that wider conversation and look at, because they have submitted a report which can be shared with your team also, but looking at Jamaica's 16 NDC commitments, and we can go through. It has been shared, it has been emailed. I'll ask that it be resent to members so you can prepare yourself, but it makes interesting reading, and so we can go through these and see where we are as a government and a country. So I'm putting the date of the 15th for the committee to meet so that we can wrap up this. At the next, whenever we can get another date, then we will continue with our schedule, which is looking at the public investment appraisal branch and the public procurement, looking at procurement, in particular with Ministry of Economic Growth and the National Works Agency. All right, so, member.
Just a word of encouragement to our team to be part of the
conversation.
Just out of experience in the past, we find that when the various entities talk together here, it tends to move things forward that separately. And it allows for the direct interaction with them. So I just, not pushing you, but urging you to accept.
Thanks, member. So we have settled the date of the next meeting. We have an apology from Member Lee, so to include in the minutes. Members, again, I want to thank you. I want to thank the team from UWI. I was a bit hesitant when MJEC said that they could not make it if we should have you come on your own, and I'm happy that we did, because it basically took up our whole meeting, and it was very informative. And I want to thank the members for making it out to the meeting today. So if we have no further business, the meeting is adjourned. I move for motion for the meeting to be adjourned. Thank you. Thank you, members. Thank you. Yes, she did. Thank you, Ms. Cohen. Right, and our consultant who was also adamant with other members that we included this topic in our lineup this year. Thank you very much. Meeting adjourned.
Allowed to speak for myself. They make all the decisions.
I'm not allowed to go anywhere by myself. They're afraid I'll escape.
See how my hand and face bruise up? Them beat me because me say me tired.
I'm only 13, but they said if I work harder, they will allow me to go home.
Me no have no birth paper, no ID. Them take all of my documents, them.
Victims of human trafficking are all around us and they need our help. Forced labor is one of the many forms of human trafficking. If you see something, say something. Report suspected cases of human trafficking. Call the nearest police station, 119 or 888-PROTECT.
When our visitors come to Jamaica, they're not just here for the sun and the sand. They're here for food. And what better way than to have one of our sauces? Tricam Processors Limited manufacture sauces, condiments, everything Jamaican. These are made by hand by myself and my team. The fact that I am now a part of an industry where people can get that experience, it's an amazing feeling. We are proud to be a part of a country